Hi everyone, welcome to another tutorial video. I've been asked by quite a few people how to paint faces, so I've been playing around with some of the new contrast paints as well, and they work really well with painting faces. So we're just going to paint a Space Marine head and see how we get on. Hopefully it'll be a bit of fun, and I'll talk you through the stages and the colours I use as we go through. So I've got the head ready here, and I've got my paints on my wet palette ready, and I'll tell you what those are as we use them. And we're going to paint this handsome chap today. So he's been sprayed with Wraithbone undercoat, and I've just painted out his undersuit and the tech bits as well, just so we can focus in on the head and the hair as we go through. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to get some Dark Oath Flesh, which I've got here. I'm just going to add just a touch of water to that and a little bit of contrast medium on the wet palette. So first thing we want to do is just get a nice light coat over the face, just to add a bit of colour to it. So when we're working this way, instead of highlighting up, we're shading down, so we're almost painting backwards to the classic way of painting. So just on the skin, I'm just going to paint a coat here. So during this video I might stop the video just to allow the paint to dry, but then we'll continue once it's dry and then on to the next stage. So we're not allowing it to fall too much, we're just moving it around, allowing it to colour the surface of the skin. So just adding a tint to it there. Okay, so that's that first stage done. We'll just let that dry for a minute and then we'll continue. Okay, so that first stage is dry now, so we're going to take some more Dark Oath Flesh. This time we're not going to dilute it so much, we're just going to use it a little bit more pure. So just getting that off the palette now. So this time we're going to wash again, but we're going to focus in just a little bit more on some more of those recessed areas. So being just a little bit more selective with where we're placing that contrast paint. So we're still adding colour to the skin. Just focusing around the nose, the eyes, under the cheeks. So leaving the raised areas with a little bit more of that first stage showing. So the skin's gaining more colour now. And you notice I don't need a lot of paint on the brush, just enough just for it to flow off and tint the skin. And just making sure it settles in those recessed areas nicely. Okay, so that's that stage done now, and we'll do the same again. We'll come back in just a minute once that's dry. Okay, now on to the third stage now, if that one's dry. So instead of using Dark Oath Flesh, we're going to use some Fyreslayer Flesh, which is just a little bit darker and a little bit richer in tone. And we're going to just repeat that process again, once again being even more selective with where we're placing this contrast paint. So inside the ears, around the back of the ears, down and under the chin. Just around the hairline as well, just so we get some definition there. So where the hairline meets the skin, you don't want a black line there. You just want a dark colour just separating those two areas. You'll see that a little bit later. We're going to go obviously into the eye sockets. around the nose. nose, underneath the nose, mouth as well, under the cheeks just a little bit. So we're just glazing a little bit underneath the cheeks now. Just around those recessed areas. You keep repeating the process until you're happy with how deep the shading is at this stage. This is almost pure Fire Slayer flesh. Okay, see now it's darker around those recessed areas and lighter on the raised areas. So that's the look we're going for. So I think that's pretty much dry now. So we're going to go on to the next stage straight away. And that's going to be to take some Cygor brown. So this is a warm, dark brown. And we are going to want to dilute this on the palette. Some contrast medium. And we're just going to focus this on the very deepest areas. So just to definitely into the eyes. Into the mouth area, under the nose. Just a very small amount, you don't need a lot. You can always build it up if you need to. Just into his ear and around the ear. And we'll pick out that hairline again. Okay, so hopefully you can see the depth now coming through a little bit more. Okay, so just let that dry and then we'll go on to the next stage. Okay, now onto this stage, the face is looking a little bit lifeless. So it's at this point now I like to punch a bit of colour in, and we're going to do that with some coloured contrast paints now. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a little bit of Flesh Terrors Red on my palette. And this is quite strong in pigment, so we're going to thin that down with some contrast medium. And I think I'm just going to add a touch of Darko Flesh to it, just to take some of that redness out. And it's going to be very dilute, and then we're going to start washing that around the nose area and around the mouth, focusing on the bottom lip. And when painting the face this way, it starts to look messy as you go through until you get to the highlighting stage, so don't worry about that too much. You really just want to get the colour on it to start with. And more around the nose. And whilst that's drying, we're just going to take a little bit of Space Wolves Grey contrast. And this is not too strong in pigment, so we should be able to use this straight. And I'm just going to paint that onto the underneath the eyes. It's got blue in tone, so it's going to help create shadow underneath the eyes, give it some depth. So it's something that I like to do. A couple of coats of that. And it adds a bit of interest to the face as well. First thing people look at on a miniature is the face. And the first thing they look at on the face is the eyes. So getting those right is quite important. So just adding a touch of blue tone underneath the face, underneath the eyes of the face, just to give it a bit of depth and shadow. And that's going to work quite well. Probably going to just take a little bit of Griff Charger Grey. Once again, that's not too strong in pigment, so we'll just have a little bit of that around there. Same place. Focusing a little bit more on the very recessed areas of the eyes. We only needed a little bit, but it's worth doing. I've got a little bit of Vulpus pink here as well, so I think that'll work quite well, just to pick out that bottom lip. So I'll mix just a touch of that with the flesh colour, because that's quite strong in colour, and we just want a little bit on there as well. It's very subtle, but it's worth doing. I'm going to get back to the original mix of Flesh Tearers Red and Dark Oak Flesh from the palette. Just pop a little bit of that underneath the shadow of the cheeks. Not on the cheeks, just in the shadows. Just give it a bit of life under there. So this stage is really about just getting that colour around the face. We'll pop a bit around his service stud as well. Okay, so now it's got some colour in there. We can go on to the next stage, which should be to start adding some highlights to the face. Then that'll be the next stage. Okay, so now we're on to the highlighting stage. Now we've got some shading on the face and we've got some colour punched in with the washes. We can start highlighting up now, concentrating on the raised areas. So I'm going to use Screaming Skull for the first highlight. I like using these yellow toned paints to highlight the skin. If you look at skin tones, they've got quite a lot of yellow in them, and sometimes you'll see miniatures painted and the skin is a little bit pinky. When it's nice to get that yellow tone in, it gives it a natural feel. So we're going to do very thin glazes, just building up slowly over the raised areas of the face, leaving the colour and the shading we've already put on in the recessed areas. So this is very thin paint. So we're basically making a glaze out of that screaming skull, just building it up on those raised areas. So we're not going for a thick coat here, we're going for many glazed layers. Just focusing on those raised areas, the cheekbones, the eyebrows. And as you're doing it thinly, you'll leave some of that shaded colour showing through as you build it up. So there's no rush, you can just keep going. So this is just screaming skull thin down onto the raised areas. So I'll finish off this and then we'll come back and we'll go on to the next stage. Okay, so I've highlighted the face with screaming skull, and now I'm going to go over the face with a second highlight, this time of just Wraithbone paint. So this is going to be heavily thinned as well. So we're going to repeat the same process that we've just done, except focusing even more on the more raised areas of the face. So we're going to be leaving some of the screaming skull showing and glazing those highlights onto the most extreme areas of the face. So on the highest areas of the cheekbones. So we're not going to cover the face in highlights now, just in those raised areas. So we're keeping it very thin. And you just keep doing this and building it up until you're happy with the finish. So tops of the eyebrows. So it's very important to keep your paint thin at this stage. It's really only the last stage where you add the expression lines and things, so you don't need to worry about that yet. We're just building up those highlights to start with. So what I like to do at this point is we've got this bottom lip and it's quite red. So what I like to do is get a highlight on there, but I don't just paint a line highlight on it. I just dot down the lip very gently to give it a natural look. Once that's done, you can just give it a little highlight along the top. And that always makes those look quite nice once they're done as well. So I'll continue to do this, finish this highlights, and we'll go on to the next stage. Okay, the Wraithbone highlights finished now. You can see the faces starting to feel a little bit softer now. We've blended out some of that shading. So the last highlight stage is the white stage, so just pure white. I'm going to use a stage basically to pick out the various highest areas, but also to describe some expression lines on the face. If you want to add those as well, this is the time to do it. So once again, using very thin white paint, thin with water. And the first thing I'll do is I'll go around the face, just pick out the very highest areas. So not too much, just where it needs it. Cheekbones, eyebrows, tops of the nose. And basically you just keep working around the face, doing this until you're happy with the finish of the highlights. And I mentioned about expression lines. So what I like to do, and you've got to have a steady hand here, but just next to the eyes here, it's nice just to put a line here. Just next to the eye. The same on the other side. There's no detail sculpted there, but it's nice to add. It gives the figure a little bit more expression. And then you do that across the face. I just add like a white dot on the lip. So I'm going to go around the face and finish this off. And I'll show you some final stages before we finish it. The foreheads tend to have some faint lines sculpted into them for expression, so it's always nice just to pick those out. The faint line as well. You can really add a lot with your brush to the facial features of a miniature. So I'm just going to go along, just add a final highlight on here, nothing too extreme. And then we'll go on to the final stages. Okay, so we've got the final highlight done on the face now. So the white highlight's finished. And so before we finish the face off, we're going to have a little bit of fun. So I've just mixed a little bit of the Screaming Skull with the Fire Slayer flesh on my palette and a touch of Black Templar in there. And it makes a natural grey. I've got that mixed here. And we're going to glaze it over the bottom of his chin, where he would have his stubble, and we'll make him look like a grizzled veteran. Across his top lip. So you don't need a lot, just enough to tint that area. Adding that flesh tone makes it look natural once it's dry. So once again, that Screaming Skull, a little bit of the flesh tone contrast paint, and a touch of grey. And you can make that as heavy as you like or as light as you like, or not do it at all. Sometimes I don't bother, sometimes it's fun to do. You keep glazing it over. So he's got a slight unshaven look now, which is quite nice. And we've lost a little bit of colour on that bottom lip as well, so whilst we're at this stage, I'm just going to glaze a little bit of that earlier mix of red and dark oak flesh just over that bottom lip. Not much, just a touch. Now once your stubble area is dry, you find that you've had your highlights knocked back a little bit. So just go back over those with your Screaming Skull and your raised bone again, just to pick out those edges to describe the shape of the face. So I'm going to finish that and then we're going to paint the eyes after. Okay, so now we're on to the tricky part. So this is where we're going to paint the eyes on a miniature, which is always a scary moment. So when we paint eyes, so imagine this area is the eye that you're painting. So try not to make it too complicated. What you want is the area around the eye to be dark, so that can be, you black that out or shade it. We didn't need to, we already shaded the eye sockets on this as we were washing through. And then all you want to do really is just 2 lines, and you want to get them as neat as you can. So this is your eye area, so you do 1 white line this way, so that's your eyeball, and then you want to do basically a line down. So you don't do a dot in the middle. If you do that, your miniatures look a little bit frightened and a little bit startled and quite silly. So what you really want to do, because the eyes are so small anyway, all you really want to do is just paint a line down like this, leaving an area on either side of white. If it's slightly larger eyes, you can curve that if you want, but when you look at a pupil and an eye, it meets the bottom of the eye. So this is what you want to do on your miniature. So basically it's a line across in white and a line down in black. And if, as I say, they're particularly large eyes or you're feeling very adventurous, you can add a dot in the corner. I've done that in the past, but only on very large eyes. So I'm going to do that on these eyes now. And I wanted to show you on here because chances are you're probably not going to pick it up on here. So I'm going to get on with this. Okay, and then I'm going to add the pupil in with black. And what I'm going to do once this is done is I'm going to finish just painting the head real quick so you guys can see the finished effect. And then we'll come back to it. So there we go. I've just give it a quick highlight on the hair and the bit on the metal just so we can see the finished effect. So hopefully you guys can see everything now. And obviously see the little bit of stubble we've added in there as well. It's just very subtle, but it's quite nice. I'll take some pictures as well so you can see that. There we go. So hopefully that's helped. We can do some more faces in the future, some different skin tones, and we can do some with regular paints as well. Just wanted to do a quick one with some contrast paints. Hopefully you found it useful, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers everyone, bye.